Welcome to episode 1 of Brennan's Breakdowns of Star Wars Supernatural Encounters, a series where I go through the 1,050-page behemoth, chapter by chapter, and point out every reference and Easter egg I spot in the book. This series is going to take a long time and a ton of researching and editing, so I hope you will enjoy the journey we are about to embark on. Before we go any further, I will mention the obvious: spoilers for Supernatural Encounters. So if you want to read Supernatural Encounters without knowing any of the connections or spoilers, stop right now and come back after you've completed the first portions. Before we delve into the text itself, let's start off by talking about what Supernatural Encounters is. I've done a few videos on the channel in the past about Supernatural Encounters, so I expect everyone here will know what it is. But just in case, here's what Joe Bongiorno wrote about the behind-the-scenes history of the work. Supernatural Encounters of the Star Wars Universe was originally intended to be published as articles in Star Wars Gamer magazine, as follow-ups to the University of Sandburg Guide to Intelligent Life, the Marvel series in Star Wars Gamer 2000. An in-universe article Rich Handley and I wrote for the first issue of the magazine, with illustrations by Joe Coroni. Although Rich and I received the green light from Lucasfilm, only Cult Encounters was far enough along when Star Wars Gamer ended in 2002. They were later conceptually reworked as Cult Encounters, Excerpts from the Last Days of Arhul Hextraphon, and Supernatural Encounters, The Trial and Transformation of Arhul Hextraphon, novellas that had been intended for publication on the Star Wars Hyperspace Service, a Lucasfilm-exclusive content initiative for which several articles, novellas, and short stories had been commissioned. The framework of Supernatural Encounters was first written at the end of 2007. Pablo Hidalgo, an old colleague from my West End Games days, who was then in charge of the Star Wars site, approved it for publication on Hyperspace. I signed a licensing agreement and a tax form and proceeded. A work of this nature involving the ancient past required a lot of work, research, and editing to make sure everything was right, and I was given the time to continue working on the manuscript until it was put on the schedule. Work on Supernatural Encounters was yet ongoing when in 2010 it was abruptly announced that the new management at Lucasfilm were discontinuing Hyperspace. Since Cult Encounters and Supernatural Encounters were never cancelled, it was hoped that they would find a new home elsewhere, and I continued working on the manuscripts. In the interim, concepts from the Encounters duology were incorporated into other works by my colleagues. Ampotum Za was added in the 2007 Hyperspace article Aliens of the Empire by Abel G. Pena and Rich Handley. The Rosm and Typhogem found their way into the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide and Book of Sith Secrets from the Dark Side by Dan Wallace. Then in late 2015, Rich Handley and I approached Lucasfilm regarding the Encounters duology, as they had expressed interest in publishing the works on the new Star Wars blog. Matt Martin of the Lucasfilm Story Group, who then ran the site, and Dan Brooks, who ran the blog, approved the works for publication, with the plan being to publish them in parts due to the length of Supernatural Encounters. I suggested an alternative means, posting them on my personal website as Abel G. Pena had done with the officially licensed Skywalkers, which had been published earlier that year. They could then be linked to or embedded in the blog. They approved this, and my plan to further edit the works over the coming months, to ensure they were up to date. In addition to the history of the writing of Supernatural Encounters, here's what Joe Bongiorno said about the licensing, in answer to the question on whether or not Supernatural Encounters was licensed. Quote, "Yes, I filled out the requisite legal documents, a CA-587 form, which is called a non-resident withholding allocation worksheet, and W-9 tax form, when the stories were first approved for publication by Pablo Hidalgo, the same licensing process I went through for my previous contributions to the expanded universe. There isn't any Lucasfilm licensing process beyond this. The 2008 and 2013 emails between me and Lucasfilm, which attest to the veracity of this, can be read here." End quote. Now that we have an in-depth understanding of what Supernatural Encounters is, from its original conception as a short story novella that has now blossomed into a 1,050-page epic odyssey, let's delve into the actual text. Before we get to Chapter 1, or even the prologue, first we have to take a look at the introduction, which encompasses pages 12 to 14. We start with a paragraph quotation from an unspecified date. I assume a quotation from ancient times, that reads, "Over the spirits of mortals spread the mantigrew wings of colossal monsters, and all manner of murky things that prey upon the heart and soul and body. Yet it may be in some far day the shadows shall fade, and their dark father be chained forever in his abyss. Till then, mortals can but stand up stoutly to the monsters in their own hearts, and with the aid of the Supreme Maker, he may yet triumph. Which is a quote that is from The Teachings of the Dai Bendu by Brother Roade. In this paragraph, we get our first reference, with the mention of the Mantigru creature, which is also known as condor dragons. The Mantigru originally appeared in The Adventures of Teebo, a Tale of Magic and Suspense picture book, afterwards appearing in the Ewoks cartoon, and later in the Galaxy's MMO video game. The Mantigru is a creature native to Endor, so it is interesting that Brother Roade would be aware of an obscure Endorian creature for his analogy. We also get a reference to the Order of Dai Bendu, an ancient sect of Force users who were precursors to the Jedi Order. The Dai Bendu Order was founded before 37,453 BBY, and appeared in many EU sourcebooks, as well as having a prominent spot in the Dawn of the Jedi comic book series. Moving on to the true beginning introduction of the book, we jump into 38 ABY, 2 years after the end of the Dark Nest trilogy, with the book's introduction. An introduction that is in-universe, as it is revealed to be Mammon Hull's 2-page introduction to the history of Arhul Hextrafon's in-universe writings and memoirs about his experiences, titled Introduction to the Expanded Edition. This is another amazing reference, as Mammon Hull is a main character featured in the Galaxy of Fear books, who popped up in a ton of source material. A renowned Shiido geneticist, Hull has an incredibly in-depth historical knowledge of the galaxy. The man he writes about, Arhul Hextrafon, the main protagonist of Supernatural Encounters, is a character that was first featured in West End Games' Star Wars sourcebook. Arhul would later go on to appear in further West End Games material, shown to be a in-universe writer and avid historian. Later, Leland Chi retroactively named him as a previously unidentified character in the original Star Wars film, A New Hope, a rebel who was seen during the medal ceremony at the end, played by Nick Joseph. Moving further into Hull's introduction, he describes the history of historian Arhul Hextrafon's writings, explaining their origin, and how they were written and revised at 3 different times, after Arhul's trip to Other Space 3 years prior in 35 ABY. The original writing, shaving of content, and then reapplication of cut content from Arhul's written account is a reference that reflects the real-world writing process of Supernatural Encounters that Joe Bongiorno himself went through in writing the book, which is quite a clever reference. We also get the reference to Other Space here, an alternate dimension filled with horrors that originated from the West End Games sourcebooks. Mammon Hull next mentions that the manuscripts were found at the house of Arhul Hextrafon after his apparent death, on Chandrila. Chandrila being a prominent planet seen throughout the EU, that originated in the Star Wars sourcebook. Perhaps Chandrila is best known for being the home planet of Rebel Alliance leader Mon Mothma. Mammon Hull also mentions the primary sidekick of the book in the opening introduction, that sidekick being Arhul's droid companion Q9X7. Q9X7 is a part of the Q9 series of astromech droids, which made appearances for the first time in the Corellian trilogy and later in New Jedi Order. The Q9 series were considered to be extremely advanced and high-tech, yet experimental. Despite the Q9 line of droid appearing in several EU sources, this was the first appearance of this specific model, Q9X7. Mammon Hull goes on to mention that Arhul and Q9 collaborated in archiving the written accounts via Mistress Mnemos and a new character named Professor Miska Tonique. Mistress Mnemos is an AI supercomputer that was associated with the rebels. Mnemos first appeared in Russ Manning's LA Times Magazine comic strips, the first appearance in the strips being in the Gambler's World arc. Next, Mammon Hull notes that the New Republic Historical Council finds Arhul's works to be incredibly controversial for their potentially galaxy-changing revelations. The New Republic Historical Council is a group associated with the New Republic, later Galactic Alliance, and the New Jedi Order, that appeared in the New Essential Chronology, the Book of Sith, and the Written Word Hyperspace article. They essentially existed to attempt to unravel the Galactic Empire's information wipe and muddling of history with propaganda. Mammon Hull then makes mention of an adventurer and black market dealer who managed to obtain and leak the Historical Council's heated debate over Arhul's texts, as he was present for it, a leaked transcript that will be included in the following book. The adventurer is a character named Mick Bidler, a character that first appeared in the Han Solo trilogy Rebel Dawn by A.C. Crispin. The character from Rebel Dawn is a Tuckerization of Mike Bidler, a real-world writer and editor who has worked on several Star Wars EU works, such as Empire's End or Lightsider. Mammon Hul's introduction goes on to note that Arhul's written accounts tracking his adventure through the stars, visions of the origin of the galaxy, and the transcript of the 2 days of the Historical Society's debate over the writing's accuracy have been meticulously compiled and organized by a plethora of doctors. The doctors are named Rigel Lawlins, Wes Adod, Trace Piskem, Royce Crater, Aaron Hortthorne, Rafe Nass, Oberon Wentham, Brigham Etchell, and Watkins Milt. All of these doctors are Tuckerizations of the real-world editors of Supernatural Encounters. I think it's so cool to learn that a team of characters in-universe, named for the real-world editors and assistants, worked with Mammon Hul to assemble the in-universe book. It is pretty easy to unscramble the names. Watkins Milt is a Tuckerization of Matt Wilkins. Rigel Lawlins is Kyle Rawlings. Wes Adod is Edward Dodds. Trace Piskem is Patrick Mace. Royce Crater is Corey Carter. Aaron Hortthorne is Harry Thornton, and Brigham Etchell is Greg Mitchell. However, I am still not sure who Rafe Nice or Oberon Wentham are. Moving on, another extremely interesting piece of info gleaned from the introduction by Mammon Hul is that the illustrations within Supernatural Encounters are in-universe art pieces based on sketches that Arhul himself stored within Master Mnemom. Master Mnemom is a new character who will later be revealed as a companion supercomputer to Mistress Mnemos. The sketches Arhul made were turned into full-color epics by characters named Dirk Chalos and Claudius Gemulo, who are apparently famous artists in the galaxy. The characters are Tuckerizations of the real-world illustrators Chris Cold and Guillaume Ducos. We also get an important piece of information. Arhul wrote down additional scribbled notes in the margins of the pages of his writings. They are called Hex Notes by Q9, and will be important for later on. Apparently Q9 insists that they still be referred to as Hex Notes, which Mammon Hul honors. Hex Notes essentially give additional historical information and context to the narrative of the story, essentially editor's notes by Arhul on his own book. With that, Mammon Hul signs off from his narrative portion of the story. Though don't fear, Galaxy of Fear fans, we will see him again in the pages to come. However, that wraps up every Easter egg and lore reference I found of note in the 3-page introduction of Supernatural Encounters. Thank you everyone for watching, and let me know if I missed anything. I hope you will all join me next time when we jump into the next part, Prologue, The Life and Death of a Historian. See you then.